In 2006, Bravo cracked open the gates of Orange County and let us peek into a world of breast implants, baseball drafts, and Botox brunches. This wasn't just reality TV. It was the beginning of a cultural empire. Before the diamonds of Beverly Hills and the peaches of Atlanta, there was Coto de Casa. Today we're taking a look back at the OGs of the OC. A deep dive you didn't know you wanted. A look back at the one that started it all. The Real Housewives of Orange County, Season 1. Without further ado, let's dive in. Episode 1. We meet 5 women behind the gates. First up, Gina Keogh, a former Playboy playmate turned real estate agent. Kimberly Bryant, who's a picture of the OC perfection. Vicki Gunvalson is a self-made insurance mogul with a control streak that could power the entire county. Lori Waring is a single mom working at Vicki's office, just trying to stay afloat. And then there's Joe De La Rosa, Slade's much younger fiancé, who'd rather be clubbing than cleaning. First up, Gina Keogh. Gina Keogh is introduced as a former Playboy playmate turned real estate agent and OC matriarch. She talks about meeting her husband Matt back when she was an actress and model, and her husband was a pitcher in the major leagues. She talks of her 3 children, Shane 18, daughter Cara 16, and Colton 13. Cara plays volleyball, but Gina wants her to be a doctor or lawyer. Shane, the golden boy, is about to graduate high school and plays baseball. He is driven towards sports and is hoping to be the 3rd generation of the family to be in the major leagues. Colton is also playing baseball, following in the footsteps of the Keogh men that came before him. They await the news of the major league draft, and the tension is high, waiting to hear if he will be drafted. We find out that Shane expected to have been drafted during high school, but he didn't keep his grades up. He makes it clear that school is just not important to him. He does end up getting drafted by the Oakland A's, but he is not in the major leagues yet. Next we meet almost soon-to-be stepmom, Joe De La Rosa, who is Slade Smiley's much younger 24-year-old fiancé. She talks about being a kept woman, but also about wanting to work at the beginning of their relationship, but Slade wants her to stay home. He pays all her bills and has a great car for her to drive. She doesn't necessarily complain about it, but she admits it is lonely being home all day with nothing to do. Slade is a father of 2 and wishes Joe would spend more time with him and the boys. He wants her to step up and be the housewife he dreamed of instead of wanting to be out with her friends. But Joe is young, and Joe loves to party. You'll find she uses the being young excuse more often than necessary to justify her lifestyle, which will cause tension throughout the season. Slade says he loves Joe, but when it comes to drinking, she doesn't know when to stop. He understands she is young, but as an engaged woman, he is uneasy with how much time she spends out with her friends who are hunting for men. Kimberly Bryant. Kimberly Bryant is the OC ideal, blonde, polished, and deeply invested in appearances. She talks about getting breast implants and how important it was to have them for her husband. She has 2 kids, 6-year-old Travis and 12-year-old Bianca, who is headed to middle school prom and gets her very first middle school makeover. Kim is fun and is not afraid of a good time and does not care what people think of her. Vicki Gunvalson. Vicki Gunvalson enters as a self-made insurance mogul with a love language of control. She owns her own insurance agency and is one of the top companies. Don, her second husband, describes her as very driven. She married young and was a mom by 24 with her first husband, Mike, who she describes the relationship she had with him as a mismatch and a ball and chain. She has 2 children, Brianna 18, who is preparing for prom and graduation, and also has plans of nursing school, and Michael 19, who graduated the year prior and is attending college but isn't too interested in school or responsibility. Last but not least, we meet recently divorced single mom Lori Waring. Lori is working at Vicki's insurance office, raising kids alone, and struggles financially. She talks about the reality of having to live in a 3-bedroom townhouse outside of Coto after the divorce and says she misses the safety of being in a gated community. Her 3 children, the oldest Ashley, who is living in LA and ends up coming home for a visit with her bags and dog in tow, says she's staying for a while because it's hard living on her own. She also has a son, Joshua, and another daughter, Sophia, who is her youngest. These 2 live at home and are adjusting to all the changes following the divorce, but it's her son, Josh, who has taken the divorce the hardest. Lori has reservations about Ashley moving home since she's downsized and only has a 3-bedroom. She doesn't know where Ashley will stay and offers a shared room or the couch. But Ashley expects someone to give up their space for her. She also doesn't want to get a job or be a built-in babysitter. Lori lets her stay, but gives her 2 weeks to get a job and enroll in school. Episode 2. Episode 2 opens with a Coto de Casa rabbit infestation. Gina's son and his friend take pellet guns to Vicky's to hunt the rabbits that are taking over the community, Elmer Fudd style. Moving on, we learn a little bit about Slade, who grew up in Alaska and was a successful bicycle racer. And he talks about being successful at his job. He loves to boast about himself and what he has, and to be honest, it's super cringe. Jo, who used to work in real estate, struggles with being a stay-at-home fiancé and admits she misses going to work every day. Back at Gina's, we meet Uncle Richie, who is not an uncle, but was Matt's old bat boy, and is now a family friend who is close to the children in their father's absence. Matt travels a lot for work and is rarely home. Vicky, her daughter Brianna, and a group of her cheerleader friends gear up for a Mexican cruise for their senior trip. Expecting her mom to be uptight the whole time, Brianna is pleasantly surprised that her mom is more laid back than normal, but not too laid back because Vicky will always be Vicky. Back in Coto, Lori takes over Vicky's duties while she is away, and we see she also has her daughter Ashley working with her at the agency. That won't last long. This is the first episode where we get an idea of the trouble her son Josh gets into when his principal calls and tells her of an incident that involves drugs. He ends up being sent to juvenile hall since this is not his first time being in trouble. Lori breaks the news to her youngest daughter, letting her know that her brother won't be coming home for a while. And later, she recaps that Josh started getting into trouble after the divorce. He started smoking pot and drinking and would come home drunk, and had already had a stint in rehab by the time filming started, which is absolutely crazy to think because he was only 16 at the time. Slade heads to work to deliver an important pitch to a man named Brett, who is also an incredibly successful businessman. Slade tries to use his place of residence to impress, but it doesn't go as planned, and the meeting doesn't go well, with distraction after distraction. And later, Slade voices his disappointment to Joe at lunch, but he's not giving up, as getting into business with Brett would be a huge deal for him. Vicky is back from the cruise and is hard at work. She talks about Dawn and Michael not working and Brianna only having a part-time job, and the stresses she is under having 2 college tuitions and too much on her plate. Michael is less than ambitious about his grades and has let them drop. He's questioned by Vicky. She wants to know if he's finally brought them up. They argue about this topic, as they do throughout the season, and she tells him to get a job because she is not giving him his summer allowance. Dawn, who has been out of work, has been given a job opportunity that is not in Coto, and he doesn't want to have to uproot the family and move to be able to take the job. Lori heads out for a night on the town with a friend named Lorelai to get a break from the chaos going on in her life with Josh. They talk about Lori getting back into dating, and Lori says the longer she has been divorced, the harder it is, and that she's picky and will not lower her standards. On a trip with the family minus her husband Matt, and plus one of not Uncle Richie, Gina and her kids head to Mexico. They ride horses on the beach, lounge by the pool, and ride ATVs. We get a glimpse of the competitive dynamic between Shane and his younger brother Colton, and Colton voices frustration about having to talk fast when it comes to being around Shane because Shane is always cutting him off. He also voices that both his brother and his father are negative people, and we find out later about an injury that contributes to Matt's behavior. And I suppose we can attribute Shane's negativity to the stress of living in the shadows of a successful Major League Baseball playing family. I can't relate, but I can imagine it was not easy. Lonely stay-at-home fiancé Jo heads out for the day in her attempt to meet other housewives in Coto de Casa as a promise she made to Slade. She overhears a conversation Kimberly is having and approaches a table of ladies and lets them know she's looking for other Coto women as she has recently moved here. Kimberly invites her to join, and a friendship will form. The episode ends with Vicky and Lori planning to attend an annual insurance convention, and Vicky admits she is frustrated with Lori, who constantly has a reason for why she is unable to produce the results that Vicky is looking for, and she says Lori needs to step it up, because 6 figures by the end of the year should be Lori's financial goal. Episode 3. Episode 3 opens with Botox injections. Vicky gets Botox in her kitchen after Lori suggests she needs it. Kimberly is preparing to leave for a girls' weekend to Palm Springs, and she's excited to leave the family behind and spend time with her friends. Shane, who was recently drafted, decides he is not going to sign, and his plan is to get more playtime at a junior college and try to impress the scouts next year. They are planning a trip minus Kara and are headed to Arizona to look at the college. Slade takes his boys to the equestrian center and attempts to meet up with Brett from the failed pitch meeting. He is determined to be in business with Brett and ends up chatting with both Brett and his wife Cindy and gets himself an invite to their home. Later, he and his boys and Joe end up at the couple's mansion, where Joe can't help but compare Slade's home to Brett and Cindy's much bigger mansion. Joe ends up getting an invite to ride horses with Cindy, but not before Slade embarrasses Joe by basically calling her dumb. Lori is leaving for the convention and gives the rules to Ashley: no sleepovers, no parties, and Ashley makes no attempts to take her mom seriously and ignores almost all the rules that were set for her. At home, Vicky also reminds Brianna of the rules of her home while she's away: no drinking and none of Michael's friends with or without alcohol at the house. Brianna is much more responsible, but Michael does not follow his rule. In Arizona, Shane, Matt, and Gina go on a tour of the college. Shane will be sharing a small dorm room, and Gina compares it to being in the Marines. But she's also not concerned about what the school looks like, as long as he gets his baseball playing time. Kimberly is on her girls' trip, where she recalls being told she had 2 to 5 years to live when she had a cancer scare 9 years prior. This changed the way she saw the world, and now she lives in the moment, enjoys everything she does, and is not afraid of looking like a fool. She talks about others in Kodo being hung up on their image and says that housewives come in 3 shades of beige. Her and her friends pass food to each other with their mouths, dare Kim to catch food in her cleavage thrown by the chef, and have the time of their lives at the club while still remaining monogamous. Back with Gina and family, we get a glimpse at how important it is to Matt that Shane be successful in baseball. Matt recalls the injury while in the major leagues that cut his career short and almost killed him. Matt was struck in the head by a baseball and had to have an emergency craniotomy to save his life. Sadly, this is the injury that changed him. Shane says he remembers that his dad was a happy-go-lucky guy before the injury and everyone wanted to be around him. But since the injury, not so much. This is a sentiment that has been mentioned more than once throughout the season. Shane goes for a baseball tryout and is disappointed with his performance. The scout lets him know he does have a lot to work on. He talks about the pressure of having to live up to the men in his family that played baseball before him. Back in the OC, Vicky calls to check in with Michael, and we find out that due to his grades, he has been kicked out of school. He voices that his plan is to take a summer class to get his grades back up and get back into college. In New Orleans, Vicky and Lori network with other insurance agents, and later while lounging at the pool along with her sister, she recounts getting a standing ovation for her sales in insurance and talks about her father being the reason she focuses on selling long-term care insurance. When he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the family had no insurance to help take care of him, and they had to spend their retirement savings for his care. Slade's frustration with Joe grows when she blows off plans with the family to go on a yacht with her friends instead of spending the evening with them as planned. This is the episode where Joe also decides to get a job and neglects to even mention wanting one to Slade. When she tells him, he doesn't take it well, and he is less than supportive and questions her and asks what happens when she gets tired of working and wants to be back at home. Joe acknowledges that Slade is taking care of her, but she says she's lost who she is. Slade accuses her of living for her and not them. And Joe says that with a job, she can do what she wants with money when she wants, basically implying that Slade controls the money she has access to. More on this later. The episode ends with Slade being angry that Joe has changed her tune about being a stay-at-home fiancé. Apparently, this was discussed before, and Joe made the decision to stay home. I mean, she's allowed to change her mind, but she probably should have talked to him. Communication, people. Episode 4. The episode opens with Joe going to her dream job, and we find out that Slade has hired an assistant, claiming that Joe is no longer available to help him. At a lunch date with friends, Joe talks about the new assistant and her looks, and she's not thrilled that Slade has hired her. She brings up the fact that Slade doesn't want her to work, and that he writes her a check every month for her spending money. Vicky is back from the convention. Tensions rise between her and Dawn when Vicky reveals she's overwhelmed with Dawn having been unemployed for 5 months. She feels like she has too much to do on her own, and while Dawn offers his assistance, Vicky still pushes back. We meet Lori's friend Steve, who brings her home from the airport. Lori talks about it never being the right time for her and Steve to take their relationship to the next level, It's either her being ready when he's not, or vice versa. Vicky's family get ready for their annual Lake Havasu trip. She wants Brianna to call out of work to attend, but Dawn says that's not a good idea. Brianna stays home for work, very responsible, while her brother Vicky and Dawn head out. Kimberly and her husband Scott meet with Gina. They were referred to her by a friend. And Gina flexes her real estate muscles and shows them some properties, and then invites them to a client's barbecue at her home the next day. At home, Shane shoots some hoops with a friend, talks about being a virgin and his lack of experience with dating and girls in general, even though he has no trouble attracting them. Gina says he's not interested in having a girlfriend because baseball is too important, and we find out during the catch-up reunion, which I'm not going to cover here, that many people seem to think that Shane was gay. At Lake Havasu, Vicky and family and her son's friends get settled and take the boat out. They do water sports while Vicky watches because she is not going to break a nail. Kimberly throws a birthday party for her son Travis. There's a piñata and water guns, and Kim hopes that dealing with the kids and helping out with the party will be a form of birth control for her young daughter Bianca. I want to mention that it's a very modest party compared to what we see in later seasons and series of the Housewives franchise. Money is obviously no issue with Kimberly, but I like that she doesn't spoil her kids rotten and wants to teach them the value of $1. Over with Lori, it's a possible release date for Josh. She attends the courthouse to find out if he will be getting out or not. The hearing doesn't go well when his psychiatrist doesn't show up to give his evaluation, and Josh doesn't get released. When Lori gets home, Ashley is in the street looking for her car, and she can't find it. Lori asks if she made the payment, but it's clear she's not sure, which to me is code for no. They find out that the car was repossessed, and the bank tells her that there wasn't enough money in her bank account. She needed $1,575, and she only had $300. On top of not having enough money to pay for her car, Lori reveals that she quit her job, and now Lori has no idea how Ashley's going to be able to afford the car. She's stuck between a rock and a hard place because if she doesn't help Ashley out, then Lori will also become a chauffeur on top of everything else she has going on. To me, the answer is clear. Ashley can take the bus, but it's a different world in the OC. Back on the lake, Vicky and Dawn get pulled over by the boat police. Excuse me for not remembering the actual terminology. Vicky wants to flirt her way out of the situation, not taking it seriously, and they ask to see the fire extinguisher and take the life jacket count. Dawn gets frustrated with Vicky not taking the severity of the boat police seriously, and he tells her to shut her mouth. I get being frustrated, but my goodness. At Gina's barbecue, the ladies and families come together. Matt makes a short appearance at the barbecue before disappearing for the evening. He is honestly never around, even when he is at home, but this is the Real Housewives of OC, so you can't really blame him. A conversation between Gina and her son Shane have them talking about Slade, who Shane thinks is being controlling over Joe by keeping her away from others at the party and stuck to his side the whole evening. It's a little strange to me how upset he gets, to be honest. It's also mentioned that Joe is closer in age to Shane than Slade, and Shane thinks she's kind of hot. The episode closes with another argument between Slade and Joe. Shane goes to the home Joe shares with Slade to help out with the ongoing rabbit problem, pellet gun in hand. And when Slade gets home, he is not happy to see Joe and Shane out front of his home. He voices that he feels like Joe is flirting with Shane and says she opened the door for him. I'm not sure. Well, I know what he means, but it's a little dramatic. He follows up that with saying they should get a room. Episode 5. Let's start with her son, Colton. We find out that he has broken his hand after punching someone allegedly for smoking marijuana and talking smack. But the incident is brushed over quickly. At dinner with Lori and Vicky, the ladies catch up. Lori talks about the pending release of her son, Josh, who is still in the juvenile detention center. And she talks about feeling the burden has lifted, knowing her son is safe, and she can finally sleep through the night. Brianna has a date night with her boyfriend, Colby. And during the dinner, Vicky calls once, twice, and then shows up at the restaurant. Vicky wants Brianna to come home after the date instead of going an hour away to see his family in Newport. She does not want Brianna being out late at night. Lori is back at court, hoping Josh will be coming home this time around, but it turns out he has to complete 2 more days to fulfill his 60 days at the center. Don is finally back working. He is flipping a home that he and Vicky purchased and is finally out of Vicky's hair. She says that her plate has been too full these days, and she's ready for Dawn to be working. Michael shows interest in wanting to get involved with their project and stops by to see what Dawn has been working on. As she shows Michael around, Dawn admits that he doesn't think Michael quite understands the magnitude of the work involved. And once he finds out, Michael seems to be ready to take school seriously, telling Dawn he can't help now. He's got a lot of schoolwork to do. Josh is released and the family picks him up and they have lunch together. They toast to a new life for Josh. Josh recounts his time in the center, and he talks about the fights, one side jumping the other, and people being pepper sprayed. It's Father's Day, and Joe and the boys surprise Slade with a massage and a trip to the beach for a picnic. And Joe lounges on the beach exhausted after spending time alone with the boys, toddler Grayson and Gavin, who's 14. She doesn't know if she's cut out to be a mom. Kimberly and the family also head to the beach where he opens his gifts. She spoils him. Vicky and Brianna go for lunch and talk about the relationship Brianna has with her biological father. They're not very close, but Vicky still tries to make sure he's in their lives. She even flew him out for Brianna's graduation. Vicky says she gets worried that Brianna is clinging to Colby because of the lack of relationship she has with her biological father. Vicky thinks she's too serious with Colby and suggests Brianna should date other people. She even goes as far as to bring up Shane, asking if Brianna thinks he's cute. Kimberly visits the doctor because she has a mole she is concerned about, and after her cancer scare 9 years ago, and 3 years earlier with a malignancy, she makes sure she gets checked out by the doctor. She gets a biopsy and later finds out that the melanoma is malignant. The episode ends with Slade taking Joe on a go-kart date where they make a bet. Joe cleans the house in a maid costume if he wins, and if Joe wins, she gets a new Louis Vuitton bag. Spoiler alert. Joe loses. Episode 6. Episode 6 kicks off with Lori and her friend Lorelai. They are taking pictures for the two to submit to Playboy, and later they're going to take a visit to the mansion. Dawn and Vicky head to dinner to celebrate Dawn's new job as a senior vice president of a manufacturing company in Sacramento. They talk about Vicky's 25-year class reunion, their pug dog needing a friend, and her separation anxiety. At home, Gina and Shane fill out paperwork for the scholarship he accepted to college in Arizona. She says she's going to miss Shane, but she won't miss the fighting between him and Kara. Shane shows off a new car, and Kara complains about Shane getting whatever he wants. Kara asks for money for school clothes and supplies, and her mom tells her she has enough clothes in her closet. When Kara tells her mother she grows out of her clothes quickly, her mother tells her to stop eating. Oh my God, not cool. This episode introduces us to Slade's parents when they come to visit. He takes his parents and Joe to a furniture store where he has the store shut down because he has a Black American Express card. Kimberly, who is still reeling from her recent biopsy, takes a hike with her husband and dog. She gets emotional when she talks about the possibility of not being able to see her husband grow old. Back at home, she helps her daughter, Bianca, plan a slumber party at a hotel so she can avoid being bothered by her younger brother. Kimberly gives her a limit that she will help pay for to teach her daughter the value of money. Lori and the family take a trip to the beach for Family Day, and Ashley opts out and says she will meet them there later. Surprisingly, she does. I did not expect that. Lori's friend Steve tags along, and they are not dating, but she likes to keep him close. It's slumber party day for Bianca. The girls order room service, and while Kim is at the bar, they make prank calls to the front desk. After more than a few annoying calls, the front desk fights back and sends security to the hotel. Bianca has to call her mom back from the bar and makes up a story about how to get out of the trouble they might be in. Vicky and her sister take a trip back to Illinois for her reunion and to see her mom, and they talk about her mom being resentful that Vicky moved to California. Vicky admits that her mom makes her feel defensive of who she's become since moving and just wants her mom to be proud of her. But the distance has put a barrier between them. Kimberly and Scott go to the biopsy follow-up, and the news, thankfully, is good. She is relieved, and she says she can go back to living. Slade and Joe have a night out. Joe's excited for a great night, but she can't be more wrong. Right off the bat, Slade tells her to go easy on the drinking. Joe accuses him of playing dad when Joe's friend, who manages the bar, sends a drink to the table. And Slade tells her she doesn't have to drink it all. He tells her she has growing up to do and says he expected the behavior to change because she's a fiancé and they want to start a family. He tells her being 24 is not an excuse to be immature. The night doesn't get any better when Slade calls Jo out for being approached by men when she goes out with her friends, and she tells him it happens often, but she's engaged and it doesn't matter. She says she doesn't understand why he gets this way when alcohol is involved, and Slade says he gets a certain way because the alcohol is a problem to the point where apparently Jo doesn't remember Slade proposing to her. Jo calls Slade a pussy, and Slade says he can't have the women he thinks is perfect for him because she is more worried about partying and drinking. Frustrated, Jo says, "We can be done." They go back and forth, and Slade gets up and leaves. He says he will no longer foot the bill for her to go out and party. Episode 7, the finale for Season 1. The episode opens with the wives and Kara heading to a diamond party. Kara's birthday is coming up, and Gina wants her to get her first piece of jewelry that will last forever. Vicky is trying to justify buying a necklace that costs more than her car. $40,000. Did you hear? Lori feels guilty for wanting to spend money on jewelry, and she thinks about what her children need before herself. But Vicky is able to change her mind. Over at the tennis court, Kimberly and Jo get together, and Jo spills the breakup news, and Kimberly is sympathetic. Jo explains that they were both resentful. Her for having to take care of his kids, and him because she's always going out with her friends. She says she's allowed herself to fill a role of a wife without being married. Back at home, Vicky questions her son about getting back into college. He's supposed to start college the following week, but hasn't even registered for classes. She scolds him and basically tells him to get it together. Lori is getting more comfortable with being a single mother, and she takes her daughter Sophia horse riding for some bonding time. She also helps out with a charity event where her friend Steve's band will be performing. And just so you know, no one shows up while Steve's band is playing because the show starts way too early. Jo is back to get her belongings that Slade has boxed up and left in the garage for her. He arrives just in time to talk to her, but Jo doesn't seem to have much to say to him. She says they have already talked about these things and broken up millions of times. She says the decision was made when he walked out on her. He says the behavior is the reason he walked out, and she tells him to find someone else with better behavior. Instead of being an adult, Slade starts taking the license plates off of the car she drives, and Jo refuses to go back and forth with him, so she jumps in the car and drives off, and Slade chases after her. He must not have found her because he ends up back home desperately trying to call her on the phone, leaving message after message after message. But Jo turns up in tears at his front door, apologizing, and they comfort each other. Ashley and Lori start to clash, and Lori feels like Ashley doesn't like Steve, and she let Lori know. They had an off-screen fight when Lori came home, and she found out Ashley packed up her things and left, but didn't take her dog. Michael and Brianna are headed to college, and Vicky is taking it as well as Vicky can. She's not really ready for it to happen, but she knows it has to. And at Gina's, Shane classes with Kara one last time before he leaves for Arizona. Kimberly invites the ladies to a party to celebrate the end of summer. Vicky and Gina talk about sending their kids off to college. Lori pulls Vicky aside to tell her about Steve. She says Steve had a drug problem, and her ultimatum was for him to get help. Steve did get help, but according to Lori's son Josh, he witnessed Steve doing drugs on a trip they took together. Lori confronted Steve and told her they were done and will never speak to him again for exposing her son to drugs. The ladies question where Jo is, and Kimberly breaks the news that Slade dumped her on their date night. And right on cue, Jo and Slade arrive at the party together. The ladies question Jo on the status of their relationship. Jo tells the ladies she's in a transitional state at the moment. They came to the party together, but that Jo is taking a time out. Kimberly asks Slade about couples counseling, and then tells Jo that Slade seems open to it. So maybe there is hope for the future. The episode closes with an update on each of the women. Lori has her sales up at the insurance agency, but her son Josh violated his parole, and she sent him to Idaho to live with his grandparents. And her daughter Ashley is working and living with a friend. Kimberly and family are happy and healthy. Gina still holds her status as a top real estate agent. Colton's hand is healed, and Kara is taking AP courses in hopes of getting into UCLA, and Shane is batting .400 and has a 2.8 GPA. Michael has a 2.9 GPA. Dawn found a job closer to home when the Sacramento job didn't work out, and Brianna has left for nursing school. Vicky is ready for the summer when her kids come home. Slade and Jo broke up. She moved out, and he took his car back. 6 weeks later, he started dating Lori. 2 weeks after that, Slade and Joe got back together. And that concludes the deep dive into Season 1, the one that started it all. Season 1 wasn't just a peek behind the gates, it was a mirror held up to the mid-2000s America. These women weren't just housewives, they were the first queens of Bravo, and they had no idea what they were about to unleash. Thank you for being here for the ride. If you made it this far, drop an orange in the comment. If you want to see more episode deep dives and recaps, hit that subscribe button. And with that, I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!